my friend William Kums. When he was a boy, he saw Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip show up in October 1964. And if you check, you'll see she was in Canada then on a so-called royal visit. William said they went off on a picnic with the Queen and Philip. And it was at a place called Dead Man's Creek, west of Kamloops. He said they gave us some lemonade, which made us all pass out. But before he did, he noticed that the Queen was leaving with 10 young children, 7 boys and 3 girls, and none of them were ever seen again. We sent a formal summons to her, and it asked her to respond to these charges. And she never did. She was found guilty of crimes against humanity, sentenced with everybody else to life imprisonment without parole. Magna Carta, section 61, it says when the monarch is threatening the rights laid out in Magna Carta, 25 sheriffs, appointed people, they have the right to seize anything owned by the monarch. So in other words, all the land, all the crown assets, all the crown land, which is all of Canada and really all of the British Commonwealth, that can be seized lawfully.
Kevin Annett, welcome to the show, my friend. You've got one of the most powerful, potent stories probably I'm ever going to have on my podcast. You're documenting the hard evidence of crimes against humanity and genocide by the Canadian government and by the church. And this rabbit hole goes very, very deep. It goes into different areas, doesn't it? We're talking King Charles, we're talking Pope Francis, we're talking the Queen, Elizabeth II, Justin Trudeau, and the network that covers, right? It's very, very deep, very, very dark, and but needs to be spoken about. And you've come under a lot of threats, and your life's been endangered because of this, and you've lost a lot of friends along the way. And we're going to hopefully talk about a lot of the stuff that's happened. But before we do, how are you anyway right now? And welcome to the show, mate. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you, brother. It's good to be on. I appreciate forums like yours because the censorship blanket is so extreme now. About 90% of the stuff we ever did has now been taken off the internet. So the memory is, like George Orwell said, it's going down the memory hole. So it's our job to resuscitate it because it's so relevant to stuff happening now. The attacks happening on all of us now.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're trying to find our ways to get the truth out there amongst all the kind of the fact checkers and kind of the censorship, and we're finding our own ways to, I guess, navigate around that, circumvent that. And this podcast is hopefully an example of that. And long may that continue, I hope. Kevin, where should we start? Because I'm obviously from London, and I am London. And you were just telling me before we came on air here, you have a story about that coming to England.
Well, yeah, London is close to my heart, not only because our family came from there originally, and I had a free-thinking ancestor called Peter Annett, who got put in this public stocks in Charing Cross in 1761 because he wrote a seditious pamphlet questioning parts of the Bible, right? And so anyway, there's a strong family tie there. The name Annett actually was French. We were Huguenots who took sanctuary in England after being burned out of France in the 1500s. So it's like there's a strong connection. But the incident you're referring to, the last time I was in the UK was 2011 in May. And I've been doing talks all over the country about the work we're doing, the complicity of the Crown and the Vatican, and a lot of these crimes against children over many centuries. And I was to speak in Trafalgar Square at a rally. There was a case in England called the Holly Greig case. And she was a young girl who had been raped by her dad, and when her mom tried to bring it to court, she got thrown in prison for doing so. It turns out that the dad was part of a whole extensive child trafficking network operating within the Attorney General's office. So anyway, they got targeted. We're going to have a rally about that in Trafalgar Square. I tried to come in at Stansted Airport. I went out to the Netherlands to give a talk, tried to get back into the country, and they wouldn't let me. They held me in the immigration prison for a day and a half, and then just deported me without reason.
No reason at all.
No reason,
don't they?
But it was interesting because right at the same time, it was right when I had been invited to a place called Brantford, Ontario, by the Mohawk people, Grand River Mohawks, and they were uncovering the remains of their relatives who had died in the oldest so-called residential school in Canada. These are internment camps where they put Native children at a very young age, where half the children never came back. I mean, that's a death rate twice that of Auschwitz. And yet people are still refusing to call it genocide. But these Mohawk people asked me to go to London to look up records of the involvement of the Crown of England in this facility that went back to the 1800s. And that's another reason I was there. So I don't think that was accidental either. They don't like you poking around, their archives and their dirty laundry, right?
No, of course not. No. They can't have that. They can have all types of unsavory characters, but they can't have anyone just sharing information. That's the last thing they want, isn't it? I mean, yeah, you just touched on it there. I mean, this is pretty groundbreaking, powerful stuff that needs uncovering. It's a real darkness that needs to have a light shined on it. Where does the story start for you, Kevin? You were a professor, but then did you stumble upon this information and then that took you in that direction? And then I was watching some of your videos and you were kind of getting a bit ostracized within your college, I think, because some of the other professors didn't like it.
Actually, John, that was a bit later.
Okay.
The way it started for me, I was a pastor in the United Church, which is the largest Protestant denomination in Canada. And in the early 1990s, I was ordained, and one of my earliest postings was in Port Alberni, which is on Vancouver Island. So we're talking west coast of Canada, and heavily populated by Native people still to this day. So I look around at my church on my first Sunday I'm hired, and there's only 10 old people sitting there. They're all white, and about a third of the population is Native. So I go up to the church board, Fred Bishop, the head of my church board, and I said, Fred, I noticed there are no Indians in the pews. What's going on? And he looked at me as if, I had just pissed on the communion table or something. And he said, well, they keep to themselves, Kevin, and we keep to ourselves, and everybody likes it that way. Right. So I thought, okay, this is an apartheid community. Let's dig into this more. Right. And as fortune had it, I got in that same week, I got a phone call from a man out on the Seychet Indian reservation, just west of town. And he asked me to come and perform a wedding ceremony for their family. And when we were sitting around having tea after, I asked him, why aren't there any Native people in any of the churches working in the stores? Like, what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. And he didn't say anything for a long time, but he was looking out the window at the site of the old Alberni internment camp, they call a residential school, that was run by my church at the time, the United Church. And he said, they killed my best friend in there for trying to run away, and he's buried in the hill out back. There are a lot of kids buried in that hill. That was the first Native home I was in. I began to hear these stories. Well, naturally, naive me. I mean, I was 36 at the time, very, like a lot of Canadians, just ignorant of my own country and the crimes that had gone on and still go on. And so I took it to people in the church, and they threatened me. They said, these natives are angry at us for taking their land. They're making it all up. Don't believe them. You've got a young family to support. I had 2 daughters by then. My second daughter had just been born. And so I was threatened, right? Mm. So the way I worked around that, I just opened up the church. We opened a food bank. I opened my pulpit to anyone who wanted to speak. And the natives took advantage of that and began to talk about these stories. Now, I didn't get canned right away because I was so popular. I took the congregation from 10 to 100 people in about 6 months. Very involved. So, the church people liked that, but they just they ostracized the natives. They wouldn't talk to them. And what was interesting, this came out later, the head of the church, that Fred Bishop guy I told you about, he went to my wife, Anne, and said, look, if Kevin keeps this stuff up, he may not keep his job here. So we want you to keep us informed about what he's doing. They got Anne to spy. And later, when the shit really hit the fan, 2 years later, I discovered the church had been taking stolen Native land that their missionaries had grabbed, selling it off to big logging companies, which were also endowing the church with a lot of money. Weyerhaeuser, it's in a big American multinational. So I discovered this big corporate connection going on between the 3 main actors of genocide: big money, the church, the government, and the crown, right? They're all just part of that cabal. So I wrote a letter about that, and not only did I get fired, but they went to Anne, my wife, and said, if you divorce him, we'll pay for your divorce, and we'll make sure you get resettled. We can assure you that you'll get custody of your children, in this crown court. And she agreed to that. Now, when that happened, and people were seeing this happen, it really blew back on the church, because people began to ask questions like, why are they spending $250,000 throwing this one minister out of the church? Why are they helping his wife leave him, right? That opened the door to this whole campaign. That was in 1995. And I immediately got invited to the Native world because for the first time, Natives were beginning to talk about these things. They were bringing lawsuits. And I was involved in the first group that began suing these churches. So I had this voluminous evidence that I began to uncover in the archives at the University of British Columbia. It's all in this book, murderbydecree.com. It's all online because you can't get in libraries. It's very censored in Canada. But, I began to find records of half the children dying. They would take the sick, young children dying of TB and smallpox, and put them in the same ward as children who are healthy, and then locking them in and never treating them. And there's letters describing that, and so it was germ warfare because they had a death quota. They had to lower the population by at least 50%. So they had a death quota of 40 to 60% every year in these places. Deliberate mass murder, sterilization programs. Any traditional person got sterilized. I've had interviews of people, if you didn't go to church, you got Ethel Wilson, this woman told me she didn't go to church and she married a traditional man up the coast in Bella Bella. So she got a red tag and had to report to this doctor who put her under an x-ray machine for about 20 minutes, just sterilized her, right? I mean, under international law, that constitutes genocide when you're trying to wipe out a group, prevent them from having children. Absolutely. So, I mean, the irony here, John, is that we proved all this. International courts have said that went on, and yet not one person in Canada has ever gone to trial for genocide or murder of these children. Over 60,000 children never came back. And that's what I began to stumble over. And so naturally, my life was ripped apart. But one door closed, another opened, and we started a campaign that eventually forced the government to admit some of these things, the pseudo apology in 2008. I mean, even the Pope came 2 years ago to Canada. And that's a whole other story, too, because he was also meeting with the Chinese to underwrite their kind of takeover of the resources and the infrastructure in North America. The Vatican and China are very close now in the way they operate. But anyway, that's another thing we can get into.
We can talk about that later. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but I mean, it's all part of the same thing, really. It's this genocide is about, not only grabbing resources and land, but changing the way everyone is and making them all little uniform components of this machine. And I think we're seeing that happen more and more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we don't really have countries, they're corporations. That's kind of my work. I kind of go into that a lot. But can I ask just for my audience and for myself, I guess, can you tell me the natives that are there, the indigenous people that are there in that region of Canada that you're referring to? What's the sort of demographic there? Like, what's the ratio? Were they, back in the mid-90s or when you stumbled upon this? And, and I'm also guessing that when you started to look into this, you gained a lot of support from them, right? And you almost were embraced and welcomed within their community, right?
I wouldn't have been able to do any of this work unless there were people on the ground. We have in my book, Murder by Decree, it's the testimonies of 357 people. Right. At the Nuremberg trials, they only had 32 eyewitnesses. So we got like 10 times the number of eyewitnesses. Yeah. But there's a difference because the people who support me are natives on the ground. It's not the official chiefs. You see, in Canada, you've got, like in a lot of apartheid regimes, right? You have the bought and paid for leadership who are associated with the state. And then you have the traditional people on the ground. And there's a real distinction between the two. I mean, first month I got to Port Alberni, I went out to the local chief. We call him Five Card George Watts. He's the local affluent band council chief. We asked him for money to help us run our food bank because it was mostly his people we were feeding. And he had a completely contemptuous attitude, like, why don't they go get a job? Like these native elites are just as bad, if not worse, than the whites, because you see the way they got into that position is when they were brought into the so-called residential school. The kids who collaborated, the kids who informed on their fellow students, they were like the Sonderkommando in Auschwitz. They were like their own people. The kids were standing there with little clubs, and they would beat their other fellow students and hit them if they spoke their language. And that those kids who collaborated went on to become the chief, and they were the chief obstacle to what we were doing. Whereas if it's the traditional clan mothers and people on the ground, a lot of the natives living on the street, they're not part of the government payoff system. So they have the freedom to do this. And they were the ones who really helped fuel this movement. They helped when we eventually occupied churches and confronted these murderers. Then they were the ones doing it, right? Very much.
So those chiefs, they're there to perpetuate the lie, basically, and just say that actually there was no genocide, there was no foul play, but they're just taking the money, right? They're just taking the money to be able to just keep the lie going. That's the thing, right?
Well, they not only do it to keep the lie going, which they do in a big way, but they sell off the land. They're the ones selling the resources to China. In the last 10 years, the West Coast Tribal Council chiefs have signed over $8 billion in oil and gas agreements with China. They're the ones profiting from it, right? Like the British did the same thing in India, right? They would take the Maharaja's sons and bring them over to Cambridge and Oxford and make them little clones of the empire to manage the empire for them. Makes sense, that's how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed John Perkins. He's written a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Yeah. And his job was to go into countries and corrupt the leaders to then become the go-to, and the ones that would then take all the money and take the American infrastructure and make sure it gets in there to the detriment of their own people. And if they went against that, they would threaten them. They would then send in the jackals, the hitmen, and if that wasn't good enough, they would then create a propaganda campaign saying they're like the leaders killing their own people, and then they're legitimizing airstrike or something. So there was like no way out. But that's why you have in places like Africa, you have 99% in poverty and 1% driving Bentleys. I mean, it's that kind of thing, isn't it? They're just you can see these people are just easily bought and paid for, aren't they?
That's the same thing, John. It's the same system all over the world. And it's very effectively hidden in Canada, partly because of the image of Canada being such a nice, progressive place. But it's also a vast country. And a lot of these crimes can happen in little places that you don't even know about. So, I mean, that's, the same system would work, right?
Same system, right. So how bad did it get then? Can we talk a bit more about these? So when you say residential schools, in England, we call them boarding schools. Right, I think it's where the families send their children off to, right? And these were just for the natives, right? These boarding schools.
Right. They were set up in the churches had mission schools, right? Like in America and Canada, the missionary would go off and do their thing. But in right after the railway linked Canada, because they were worried about the Americans grabbing the West Coast, so they built this railway in 1886, Canadian Pacific Railway. Right after that, they formed the RCMP. They formed the Indian Act, which is still in place, which is an illegal document. You're not allowed to target a race with specific legislation under international law. Like you don't have an Italian Act, right? All Italians have to do this, right? But they have an Indian Act in Canada, and that came out of the same period where they were corralling the remnant population, because by then the smallpox and everything killed off over 90% of them. But they also set up these boarding schools at the same time, government sanctioned, so the Crown authorizes it. The church gets to appoint the principal. They both fund it. And by law, a law passed in 1920 in Canada, order in council, not by Parliament, but a secret Privy Council order right from London that nobody knew about. Every child 7 years and older had to go in or their parents would be arrested. Now, in practice, the Mounties would scoop up everybody in a village. My friend Harriet Nahani, she and I helped launch this movement after I got fired. In her village of Klaus on the west coast of Vancouver Island, she said they heard this whistle one day. The Mountie gunboat showed up. The Mounties got out with clubs and started knocking down all the parents. They took all of the children, including tearing babies out of the arms of mothers, threw them all on this gunboat. Harriet said they were in chains for 3 days. Some of the kids died. She never knew what happened to the babies. She assumed they were either killed or trafficked, which was still common in the native world. So they took all the children, and you can imagine what a community is like if the children are just all gone. I mean, it rips the heart and soul out of it, people to do that, and it was deliberate. There was a genocide targeted specifically at children, and that's kind of unique in the world. The magnitude of the horror is impossible to get your mind around, but. Then there was open season on these children. They could do whatever they wanted.
Who did it? Who actually kidnapped them all? Who exactly?
It was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They were authorized as the police arm of these Indian schools. which is ironic because later the RCMP investigate themselves by looking into the disappearances that they caused, right? Absurd. But the churches also did it. Often priests would show up. We're talking the Catholics, the Anglicans, and the Methodist Presbyterian, who formed the United Church. So all the churches were doing it. And they even had right to form vigilante groups and posses to go out and just grab any Indian. It was all of that going on. And then it was open season in these places. They were rarely fed. My friend Delmar Johnny, he's a Cowichan man on Vancouver Island. He said the only reason he survived is he was on the garbage detail. So they were eating the garbage thrown away by the priests and nuns, because otherwise they starved the children to death. They would often just let them starve to death, right?
Right. So a lot of them actually didn't even make it into these residential schools, these boarding schools, but the ones that did, they'd be, having to find their own ways to survive within there, right?
Right. And they were trafficked. They were, sent off to the Indian hospitals for experimentation. It was a reign of terror. And it was also a kind of a factory to produce this compliant class of native chiefs who would later administer the genocide, which is exactly what they're doing. They have on a typical Indian reservation in Canada, they have a quota every year of people they have to throw off the band council rolls. So in other words, they throw people out of their homes, they grab their land. A lot of over 30 years ago, when I first began to do street ministry in Vancouver, most of the people I was working with were landless natives. They were the ones who were the women prostituting themselves, young girls as young as 12, homeless. 90% of the homeless are all native. These are people who have been forced off their land by their own chiefs in the pay of these big multinational resource companies, right, to get the land, to get the oil and gas, like now that China's doing. So it's this ongoing genocide, and it's impossible for a white Canadian to see because they just ignore all that. They can afford to ignore it, right? Because they won the war, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's just, and then if you do talk about it, it's you lost your job, didn't you? Talking about it, and you become the enemy and you become the black sheep, and suddenly people are starting to come down on you and target you and throw bullets at you, but you're just the one trying to relay information. It's just funny how people are programmed that way, isn't it?
Well, it's also I'm the guilty conscience of my people, right? And better to scapegoat and blacklist somebody, which they did very effectively. I mean, to give you an example, just about 6 months ago, I was invited by a group of Vancouver school teachers to talk about my research, because the whitewash that's occurred in Canada is unbelievable. They're claiming there are no mass graves and children never died. It's that extreme, right? But I was in this conference of Vancouver school teachers. Within half an hour, the principal showed up and asked me to leave. And he said, some people have objected to your presence. And I said, which people? And, it's always like that. We're talking almost 30 years since I was fired. And yet I'm still in the official world, persona non grata still, right?
Yeah. And how's things changed in those 30 years within that, that area?
Changed in what sense?
Well, like the demographic change, they've lost, how much land have they lost? How, people have been wiped out. No, the demographic.
It's pretty much, yeah. The only people left on reservations now are the chiefs and their families and friends. So things are actually looking more affluent now because that's 90% of the people are dead or driven off their land. And it's demographically, I mean, they're being eliminated, as we speak. And the people that are taking their land, at least in British Columbia, where I am on the West Coast, are Chinese immigrants. They're being brought in en masse through Prince Rupert, the big deep sea port in northern BC. And a lot of the disappearances, if you trace where the Chinese have their oil and gas lines, the liquid natural gas lines, it's all along what are called the Highway of Tears in northern BC, where hundreds of native people go missing every year. And it's not accidental. I mean, they're being driven off their land. So one of the things that allows China to take over the country is Justin Trudeau passed a law called the Foreign Investment Protection Act, or FIPA. First law he passed when he came into power, and it allows China it removes all limit on Chinese investment in Canada, and it allows China, believe it or not, to station their troops on Canadian soil. So, I mean, I would think that would be an act of treason, but yeah. You see them all operate all up and down the coast, and so it's an absolute takeover. and at every level. And geopolitically, it makes sense because China's a rising power and America's the chief adversary. So it's, my personal theory about American politics is both Republicans and Democrats are being funded by China to tear each other apart, because that's in The Art of War, and Sun Tzu, he says, never fight a bigger enemy, get your enemy to destroy itself. And that's what America's doing. And Canada's providing the resources and means to make it happen.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. It's difficult to know, like, the actual power base. Is it the Vatican? Is it Israel? Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it, it's just all so complex. I just, I can lose myself trying to figure it out. But
you follow the money, like in any situation, you follow the money. And when Pope Francis or Jorge Bergoglio came to Canada 2 years ago, they made this big song and dance about him issuing an apology. It's nonsense. But, what they didn't say is he was out on the West Coast in Prince Rupert meeting with the Chinese. He and his so-called Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, met with Chinese officials, and they promised China $960 billion every year credit to buy up not only the resources, but the whole infrastructure in North America, the roads, the railway, 90% of the containers in the ports of Seattle and Vancouver are now owned by Chinese companies. I mean, and so the Vatican's funding it, right? And which is one of the, when you think about it, China and the Pope, they have the same notion of leadership. You got the emperor and everybody obeys the emperor. The last thing you want is any tradition of common law and governance, right?
Well, I was going to ask you a bit later on, because the common law, you still have the common law there. But and I know that didn't you do some kind of arrest order on Pope Francis? Was that?
Oh yeah, well, that's the next phase in the story. Let me carry on.
Yeah, sorry, you can. And also, sorry, can I just ask a question then? Why were they genociding the natives, the indigenous population there? Because is it just the culture what they were most worried about? Because they're a strong culture. Yeah. Was it just purely ethnic, like and what was it, do you think?
Well, it was all of the above, and it was, first of all, the Vatican authorized it. Their laws in the 1400s said anyone who isn't a Catholic doesn't have the right to live. We can do whatever we want to them. My Huguenot ancestors in France received the full fire of that. They tried to exterminate us, and that's why we came to England. But it was true all over the world. And what they said is any Christian, i.e. Catholic king must, not just can, but must conquer any non-Catholic people. And that's why the Jesuits were created in the 1500s, right at the same time, right? But the thing about what happened in North America was the traditional people there, and I know because my family, we grew up in Winnipeg and in the center of the country, and we intermarried with the Cree and the Ojibwe. So I have Métis or mixed blood relatives, right? And they tell me all the time, I was raised on these stories of how there was a prophecy among all the nations on what they call Turtle Island or North America, that a white double-headed serpent was going to come from the east. And it's interesting because the word Vatican, it's an Etruscan word meaning sacred serpent. And so they said the serpent has two minds. One mind is very kind and human. The other is murderous. And each mind doesn't know the other exists. And I'm saying that's a perfect description of our culture. I mean, the very people who wiped out my life were saying, we're praying for you, Kevin. As they funded my wife to leave me and take my children and blacklist me and everything and help murder my friends. They also think of themselves as good people and they go to church on Sunday. I mean, so it's this completely dissociated, nutty culture. And our ancestors saw that coming. And the Vatican treated Native people like they did, quote, heretics in Europe. They had to be exterminated because I think they were a better embodiment of Christ's message than Europeans. As a matter of fact, there was a French explorer, Jacques Cartier, on the East Coast, who said in his diary in 1534, these native people are better Christians than we are because they share everything they have. There's no weapons among them. They love one another. In other words, we can't let this example survive because it shows up European Christendom, right? For just being about power and money. So I think that it was all of those reasons. and to get the land and resources, of course. I mean, it's happened all over the world. Why wouldn't it happen in Canada, right?
Yeah. It's sad. It's really sad. Yeah. Um, what was the next part in your story then at that point? Because
Oh,
yeah, I've got so many things, but
I know.
I don't want to ask a question that comes a lot later down the timeline, if you don't want to.
That's all right. It's all connected. But
Yeah.
okay, so I'm thrown out of the church. I'm working with Native people. We started a big campaign in Canada, which eventually went all over the world, and exposing Vatican crimes and the crimes of these other churches. Right after the quote apology comes from the Canadian government, they do a co-optation strategy. So they censor me right out of the press. I'm never mentioned again. I still am never named in any Canadian media. It was just like in apartheid South Africa, when you're banned, your name can never be mentioned, just complete whitewash. So that happened. But right at the same time, I got invited to Europe in Dublin by a group of people suing the Catholic Church, and they heard about what we're doing, right? So in 2010, we formed this thing, the International Tribunal of Crimes of Church and State, the ITCCS. And that began to document these same things happening all over. And it was incredible, John. I was sitting in Dublin listening to people's stories, and I said to them, this is like listening to Native people. I mean, the same crimes, the same cover-up. They were talking about a mass grave of babies discovered in Choom on the West Coast. That made news for a while. And it was the same system of, the Vatican has this policy called crimen solicitanus. It's been around since 1929. It said when children are raped or harmed by a priest, everyone is silenced. No one tells the police. And if you do talk, you're excommunicated, which to a Catholic means you go to hell for snitching on a rapist, right? Go figure that one. But it's a criminal conspiracy that every priest, every Catholic in the world is part of to protect child rapists. And we said in that system, of course, there's going to be all these crimes, right? You're just, when you cover up crimes, they're just doing what the Vatican orders them to do, right? So we realized we need to unite across the borders, and we eventually sponsored a common law court case that put Pope Benedict and the Queen and other people on trial, and actually helped force his resignation in 2013.
Pope
Benedict.
Pope Benedict. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Ratzinger, the evil emperor. What happened was we worked with people in Spain, and they took our evidence of the Pope's involvement in silencing, evidence of child trafficking, ordering all the bishops to destroy evidence, all this stuff. And we took it to our friends there. They gave it to the Spanish government, who wrote a diplomatic note to the Vatican 6 days before Ratzinger resigned. And it said if he comes to Spain, the Pope could face arrest based on what was in our docket of evidence. Not only Ratzinger steps down, but 3 other cardinals named in our indictment, they all resigned within a year, right? Actually less than a year, including the head of the Jesuits, Adolfo Pichon. So, I mean, this had an impact. And after that, we find the whole common law awareness blossoms all over the world. And people start doing the same kind of common law court trials. And now it's become a real movement, right? So, but it started because we were successful in that case against Ratzinger and the Queen.
Yeah.
Right?
So tell me more about the Queen then. So what happened there then?
Well, part of the evidence against her was my friend William Kums. He was a native man, homeless man in Vancouver. He was involved in a whole movement when we started occupying churches and that. When he was a boy in Kamloops, which is up in the interior of BC, he saw Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip show up in October 1964. And if you check, you'll see she was in Canada then on a so-called royal visit. She said William said they went off on a picnic with the Queen and Philip. And it was at a place called Dead Man's Creek, west of Kamloops. He said they gave us some lemonade, which made us all pass out. But before he did, he noticed that the Queen was leaving with 10 young children, 7 boys and 3 girls, and none of them were ever seen again. So in our court case, we sent a formal summons to her through the Governor General of Canada. And it asked her to respond to these charges. And she never did, which was interesting because under the law, it's how King Charles I had his head cut off in 1649. He refused to plea. And if I'm claiming something about you and you don't defend your good name in public, you're not disagreeing with what's being said. It's called a pro confesso.
acquiescence to the crime, basically.
Yes,
Yeah,
de
yeah,
facto admission of guilt.
yeah.
And that's how it was interpreted by the court. She was found guilty of crimes against humanity, sentenced with everybody else to life imprisonment without parole. But most importantly, and this is what led to the whole movement to build a republic in Canada, the head of state of Canada is now a convicted criminal. Well, that means all bets are off, folks. I mean, we need a new regime at that point, and that's what white Canadians need. They need to dissociate from the crown, which has all this blood on its hands,
Mm.
and create our own self-governing republic on a new basis of equality with Native people. That's what we've been working for. Kind of one of the consequences of this whole campaign is that we realize we've got to wipe that whole slate clean of the tradition of genocide and create something new, and that's what we're working towards with mixed success. But I mean, I think morally and legally,
Yeah.
people are required to do that when you're in a genocidal system, right?
Yeah, isn't it not the case that if someone, let's say like Queen Elizabeth, she was charged and she wasn't able to come forward to clear her name, that gives permission to the people under common law to, I think, be able to seize back their own lands, doesn't it, or something?
Yes.
In common law that says that. Could you? I'm not quite, clued up enough to give the full spiel on that. Could you lay out for
a
us?
number of reasons, John. In Magna Carta, Section 61, just look it up. Okay, in Magna Carta, it's kind of foundational to English common law and governance. And it says when the monarch is threatening the rights laid out in Magna Carta, 25 sheriffs, these are kind of barons at the time, but appointed people, right? It doesn't have to be a baron, it can be anyone acting in the name of the court. They have the right to seize anything owned by the monarch except his life and the life of his family. So in other words, all the land, all the crown assets, all the crown land, which is all of Canada and really all of the British Commonwealth, that can be seized lawfully under Magna Carta when it's proved that the rights are being endangered by the monarch. Also, don't forget, the monarchy was legally abolished by Parliament March 17th, 1649, after they executed Charles for conducting a war against his own people in the behest of the Vatican, who were funding him and giving him mercenary troops to overthrow Parliament. They said the House of Lords and the monarch are abolished forever, the monarchy, and anyone who tries to reestablish it is committing treason against the people. So 11 years later, Charles II does a military coup, reimposes the monarchy, but that's a de facto power. It's not de jure. It's not a lawful authority under, English common law says, be you ever so high, you are not above the law. Not the statutes the crown brings in to protect itself, but the law, which supersedes, it supersedes all statute. That's the point. In the U.S. Supreme Court has many times passed the statement that statute without consent is not law. So, they can bring in all the COVID regulations, they can bring in whatever they want.
Yeah.
But if I don't consent and I'm not hurting anybody, it has no authority over me. And I can walk away.
We forget that foundation of common law. I mean, they're called acts for a reason. They're pretending to be something, just like an act on stage. And so when people offer you these acts, just remember that's not enshrined in any kind of real law. That's just an offering. No. It's actually a contract, and people are unfortunately unwittingly agreeing to that contract by playing along with it. And we saw that in the last 4 years, where none of the kind of the COVID stuff, that the lockdowns or anything like that was allowed, in common law. You can't lock healthy people down, but they were bringing acts out. And I think even mandate, if you look at the etymology, the legal etymology of that, it actually doesn't mean you have to do something. There's a whole Black Law's dictionary of terms that you can look at, and it's all, people have been befuddled by these terms, but the only thing that we know we have is common law of the land. And unless you are actually harming another person, you are free to live on this land as you wish.
Right.
But we kind of forget that. Just going back to the Queen, Kevin, so those children, did William actually know what happened to them?
No, the children who Elizabeth took were all local Native children, and they were never seen again. They all vanished for good. And so what we did in response to that was we began to hold meetings after we formed the tribunal, the ITCCS in Europe in the summer of 2010. We began to hold meetings all over Europe, and we sponsored a meeting to address the charges against Elizabeth. And William Kums, who was the eyewitness, we paid his way to come over to London, and he was scheduled to come to give testimony about what he saw. 2 days before that, the RCMP showed up, took him into St. Paul's Catholic Hospital in Vancouver. He was dead within a day. And we have on testimony of Chloe Kirker, who is his nurse, his intensive care nurse at St. Paul's. And she said he had none of the symptoms of TB, which was the official cause of death, tubercular meningitis. He didn't have any symptoms of TB, but he had all the indications of poisoning. Black fingernails, they're called mesalines. They're formed when you're poisoned with arsenic. And, they poisoned William, because of that. Then Chloe Kirker had to leave Canada because her life was threatened. All of this stuff happens. We see natives are not citizens under the law in Canada. They're wards of the crown, which means you can kill a native and there's no consequence. They're like a child under the law. They're a dependency. You can't even open a bank account if you live on a reservation without permission of the Minister of Indian Affairs. It's like completely controlled culture. And if you're not in the reserve, you're living on the street and you're prey to police. It was so common. When I was doing street ministry, there was an infamous case of 2 Vancouver police put 13 bullets into a homeless native man. And he was inebriated lying in the alley. They just used him as a target practice. They weren't even reprimanded. They said, oh, he was threatening us with a knife. But you can do that to natives in Canada. And that's why the great courage of all of the native people who took part in that campaign, they knew they could die the next day because of it. And in fact, 7 of them did. There were 7 people, including William, native people in our campaign who all died, beaten to death by police, died in hospital, all of the usual ways you can kill natives. So, it's what we say, the ongoing genocide. The system doesn't change. It just switches its appearance around a bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, shocking. And just so the when was that when the Queen Elizabeth, when you put in the charge, and you went through the common law courts? What year was that?
Well, William was killed February 26, 2011. Right. Okay. And it's one of the things that prompted. And right at the same time, I was doing that dig in the Brantford school. Yeah. And we found bones that turned out to be that of children. We found buttons off school uniforms. All of this indications that there were children buried there. We took all of that to the first common law court case, which convened in the summer of 2012 in Brussels. And we put it all before the court. There were 30, I call them the dirty 30, the 30 defendants, Elizabeth Windsor, Joseph Ratzinger, the Pope, the Queen, all the top officials of church and state. They were all summoned. They were all found guilty. Like I said earlier, and the thing about a common law court verdict, you may not be able to enforce it, just by yourself, but any court in the world can issue warrants based on the verdict. And that's the power of it. That's why Ratzinger resigned and never left the Vatican until the day he died, right? Because they knew he could face arrest if another court issued an arrest warrant based on our evidence. So I say to people, don't worry about whether you personally can enforce it and go arrest these people. Any court in the world can deputize police to go do it, as you can, right? And that's kind of, we've been trying to teach people that over the years, that we have incredible power in our hands if we overcome the fear and ignorance that holds us back, right?
So who can enforce that, though? Like, who could actually go and arrest the Queen? Not that you can now, but who can do that?
Anybody.
Right.
Anybody, any citizen. But we can, and we've done this. We've deputized police in Canada, to enforce the law. It's. By the way, speaking of monarchs, Charles gave the kill order to have William murdered. And we know that this was up on our website, murderbydecree.com. There was a guy called Major Johnny Thompson. He's the security advisor. I think he still is, or he might have resigned. But people around him leaked to friends of ours in England that he had attended a meeting in Buckinghamshire in late 2010, and William's name came up and said this man has to be removed because he's a threat to the royal family. So we have evidence that Charles is personally implicated in the kill order against William, and another kind of nefarious things connected to a thing which I haven't mentioned yet, the Ninth Circle, which is a satanic cult operating within the Catholic and Anglican churches. It's been around for centuries.
Not what?
Child sacrificial cult.
Not the Knights Templar. Is that something separate?
That's separate, but it's no, it was set up by the Jesuits, we believe. We've seen some Vatican archive documents referring to the Ninth Circle. Do you want to get? Should I mention?
Yeah. Right, we'll go where it takes us. Yeah.
So the Ninth Circle, if you've read the Inferno by Dante, the Italian poet in the Middle Ages, he wrote in the Inferno. It's about this guy who goes down through the 9 levels of hell to where Satan resides, and on the 9th level, or the 9th circle of hell, is Satan in a frozen lake, and that's the lowest level. It's where people go when they betrayed a sacred trust. Now, what's more sacred than the trust of a child, right? And in these, now we've interviewed, I just spoke to her again the other day, actually, Toos Nijenhuis. She's a Dutch woman. And I can send you the links to the interviews with her. She was part of this Ninth Circle. It's an intergenerational Catholic cult. And so the children are born into it. The eldest child is either sacrificed by the father and mother or inducted into the cult. And they rape, torture, and murder children and then cannibalize them. Because like in the Catholic Mass, it's believed the blood of the innocent redeems you. The blood of Christ, the blood of a child. Literal belief, right? And she has horrific descriptions of what went on in places like Carnarvon Castle in Wales, where she saw Ratzinger, she saw Prince Philip, she saw Charles. He was coronated there in 1970, I believe, when he became Prince of Wales. And that castle, it's infamous. And we also believe that 2 of the children who were kidnapped by the Queen, those 10 native children, 2 of them ended up there. And they weren't all killed. They were brought back and used in these rituals. So, it goes on, and the rabbit hole doesn't seem to have a bottom, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've gone down that rabbit hole. That's what my channel's all about. I've spoken to satanic ritual abuse survivors. I've spoken to people that were involved in killing other children on altars in these rituals, and they explain everything that goes on. When you get to that level, there's like the Faustus bargain, the Faustus, selling the soul to the devil, so to speak. There's like a transdimensional aspect where there's an exchange that goes on. These people are the masters of the energetic world, and in biblical terms, you would say Satan, the demon. But when they sacrifice a child, when they kill a child, there is the child on an energetic level represents purity and innocence, and so you're giving that innocence away, and in return, and I'm still trying to work this out, Kevin, but they are then given gifts. They're propelled through society. I think partly it's a networking thing, but there's also some kind of energetic transfer where they're kind of given these sort of powers. And some of the children actually they've been tortured, and they're kept, like you say, some of them are kept alive. They're put through this kind of MK Ultra torture where their mind fragments, and then they're given hypnotic commands within those altars. And then we'd call that multiple personality disorder, but these are the ones that are then kept alive and then groomed into positions of power. So they have control of these people all the way through to adulthood, where they're then put into like presidents and prime ministers and corporate, presidents and stuff like that. That's where I'm at in my level of understanding. But I need to speak to people like you to help me connect more of the dots, I think,
that's all true what you said. And it's when you think about it, our culture is parasitic on every level, on the planet, on people. We exist to provide labor and taxes for this machine, right? So it's reflecting, like one cell reflects the whole body in the same way we all reflect in that. But there's kind of a deeper spiritual dimension to this. And I know personally, because when I was still a minister in Port Alberni, about less than a year before I got fired and the boot came down on me, I was asked to take part in an exorcism. Now, this wasn't just a lot of possessed cases. You can impute kind of psychological reasons, schizophrenia, whatever, a lot of these symptoms people have. But in this case, you could feel it when you walked into the room. It was palpable, this thing I can't describe, but it's horrible. You just want to get away from it, right? But I was in a secondary group of people protecting the primary exorcist. These weren't church people. These were actually native people who were doing their own version of an exorcism. And they invited me in because I was so friendly with the natives, right? But what I witnessed there was a woman, and her body was actually changing in appearance and shape. And this thing, it took about over a day, constant like work, and eventually bringing in the calling on the ancestors and the primal energy and animal guides and the whole thing they use in the native world to bring in the light again, if you like. They used that, and finally this thing left. But as it went, I had this image of it kind of going like this, kind of striking at everybody, and it got me right here. It struck me inside, right here above the heart. And about a year after I was fired, this woman called me out of the blue, and she said, "I've had a dream about you and I need to talk to you." And she was kind of a psychic in Vancouver, right? But genuine. Like, I would walk in and she began telling me things about my life I'd never told anybody, right? She could read me really well. And she said, "They've targeted you because of who you are, but also what you're uncovering. And they've struck you above the heart, and it's eating you from the inside out. And it's designed to kill your heart, and then everything else falls," right? So it also, however, she said, gives you an insight into the world. So we worked together, and after that, I knew when things were coming. Like, people wonder why you're still alive. I developed that other sense. I knew when danger was coming. I knew how to maneuver, right? Because of that contact. But what was really strange was when she was reading me, she said, "I'm getting these images of a facility in northern BC and one in California, and it's some kind of psychic weapon. And they don't know how to use it. They breached the dimensions, and they don't know what they've unleashed. And they're not in control of it anymore, right? And they're upset about your bringing this stuff out in the native world because the resources there are needed." She didn't say who, but she just said they need the resources. They need this compliant native population to get all the resources fueling their system. And she said that's one of the reasons, but there's more. And we didn't actually have the opportunity to go into more because she died soon after that. She died about a month later, and she was young. She was in her 40s, right? But anyway, I don't know if I wandered there, but it's all about these forces, and I know it's responsible for the appearance of what's going on now with the whole COVID corporate police state embracing the world. That's a physical manifestation of this other thing happening too. And that's why we got to fight on that level as well as, the level we're talking about. And that's a harder thing for people because we're all so fixed on the appearances, right? And we need to develop that inner sight. Otherwise you can't survive this battle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's there's different ways that you can I guess explain that, but what happens in the physical reality is also happening in, some people call it the astral, or some people call it the fourth dimension, and we're in the third dimension. But I think you alluded to it earlier, it's fractal. So if you take out a small part of a hologram, you take out a tiny piece and affect that tiny piece, it actually affects the whole hologram. It's a little bit like that. So we need to work on our physical realities, changing things, but there's also an energetic, you can call it that as well, an energetic reality that expresses itself in the same way simultaneously. And we saw that with COVID and the totalitarian, the centralization of power. And I think that's probably also happening in that astral. It's happening in that energetic world as well. And also
one of the things I found, it was very strange, around 2002, when we had held our first tribunal in 1998, we invited in international groups and that. I went to speak, and this is when I first began to see that there was something else going on here than what I thought. I was invited to a church group, kind of a new age church in Vancouver, and the response was unbelievable. The people were thrusting money in my hands. We had 68 people volunteer to come out and do our actions. They were buying up all my books. I thought, this is great. Then it's turned off like a light switch. I mean, every single person then within about a week fell away, wouldn't answer my calls, they just clicked off like a light switch. And I thought it was strange. So I went to the door of the woman who had first invited me. She opens the door and looks at me like I'm a stranger. Like, who are you? And she she denied that I'd ever come to speak to them. And I know I'm not delusional because I was with my partner at the time, and she confirmed all this. And she genuinely acted like she didn't know me. So I'm thinking, okay, something's happened to these people, and you can do it when you're in a group. And the church groups are the easiest to do with because they're already in kind of a herd mentality, your standard religious group. And so it's easy to affect people. So they were experimented on with some kind of mind control technology that can literally change thoughts, emotional dispositions, memory, everything. We know that you can do that now with these microchips. And the whole COVID thing, I think, was part of that new regime imposing that on everyone. So, I mean, I had a taste of that early on. So I was always kind of aware that, okay, there's...
Surely you just say, look, just check on your bookshelf. My book should be there,
That's a good idea. I forgot about that.
Yeah. I've got the receipt. I've got your bank details.
Yep.
Anyway, yeah.
She was probably programmed to burn the book. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. God, I mean, who knows? I mean, nothing's out the question. Nothing's off limits for these people, is it? So,
right.
yeah, carry on. Sorry. But I did also want to ask you at some point, I'll just put a flag in it now, but your other friends that died as well, apart from William, don't know if you're going to come on to that, but I think that's important.
Oh, well, there being a number of them. Harriet, who set up Harriet Nahani was the first person ever to go public with witnessing the death of a little child. She was in a Alberni residential school. She saw a guy called Alfred Caldwell, the principal, kick a little girl downstairs to her death. And she was hiding under the stairs because she was the daughter of a spirit dancer, kind of traditional elder. And they targeted children who were from that lineage, that spiritual lineage. William, too, was a spirit dancer. Like anyone who had that ancestral knowledge and that, they target to wipe out. So she went public with me. We did the first campaign. She got arrested and killed in prison, basically, in Vancouver. Others, like I say, there were 7 people in our movement who were all targeted and killed by this. And that's done to scare people, of course, right? I mean, and to keep people quiet, but it doesn't ultimately work,
No. They can't take into consideration, the courage and humanity. No. And I think because these people that are I don't want to say in control, but think they're in control, they don't come from the heart. Courage, if you look at the etymology of that, it actually means from the heart. And they have no concept of that. So they have they can't predict for the consciousness of the planet, the humanity aspect of it, the heart-centeredness. They have that to them is an unknown language. Yeah. So I think they can only control things to a certain degree, but when it comes to that sort of thing, they are just out of their depth, I think.
Well, yeah, and you're right. And Sun Tzu in The Art of War says, never back your enemy into a corner, because that's when they find their real courage and resolve, when they know they're going to die, when you know you have nothing to lose. And that's one of the reasons why I persisted in this, and all my homeless Native friends did, because what the hell do we have to lose? You're taking my children, taking my livelihood, I'm living out of my car. Bring it on. I mean, what else can you do? I'm not worried anymore of losing something. Yeah. And that's what holds most people back. What might I lose, rather than what's going to happen if we don't act, right?
Absolutely.
And that's that shift in that makes people a fighter rather than a reactor.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I just had a funeral director on called John O'Looney, and he's basically saying that he's never seen so many young people that he's pulling blood clots out of. Young, dead people, like hundreds of them, since they've had this, And he said, I'm not worried. They can they know where I live. Come get me, he says. But I'm happy to go. I'm happy to go, but I need to know that I'm doing my best to bring this message out. I'm not fearful of death. Here's my address. Come get me. And I just think that's
right.
If everyone acted like that, we wouldn't have a problem. We wouldn't be in this mess.
No. Well, John, one of the things that helps with that is, I mentioned my ancestor Peter Annett, the free thinker who was stuck in the stocks at age 70 because he was writing these. He not only wrote these pamphlets criticizing the Bible and the Church of England, but he would then put them up on wall sheets and plaster them in the east side of London. He was kind of trying to appeal to people to kind of overcome this mind control of the church and think for yourself, right? And they didn't like that, him appealing to the masses like that. So it's one of the reasons they put him in jail. But I feel that I stand in the continuity of all my ancestors. Like one of the things that kept me going is I'm part of this great river, like we all are, the great river of history. We're putting our little contribution in, but it doesn't die, right?
Yeah, doesn't
You know, and we have to raise ourselves up to that level and be raised up by those around us. Like when I saw what my native friends could lose by them doing it, that inspired me. Like, I'm not going to back down. Well, there's a beautiful anecdote I experienced with William Kums, who saw Elizabeth take those kids, and he couldn't go near a Catholic church, hear a church bell ring or anything without getting physically ill, because they used to hold him on a rack, the priests in the Catholic school, and sodomize him all the time. And he was terrified. But the day we occupied, and I haven't talked about this, I can send you the clip of it. It's beautiful. There's like 100 of us walking into this Catholic church, the main cathedral. We just took it over. And the priest didn't know what to do. It was on a Sunday. And we had a big banner. All the children need a proper burial. We confronted them. It's really what tipped the scale. It was like what natives say, counting coup. You know, we took away the power of the enemy there. And within a couple of weeks, the government started admitting to things and talking about apologies and that. Very much, I think, because of that action. But anyway, when we're occupying the church, I look over and there's William in there with us. And he's got a big smile on his face. He's handing out flyers to the people in the pews and telling them not to donate to this child killing church. And I say to him after, you know, we're all outside after, all happy, and because the police never showed up. I mean, there was just like this energy around us that protected all of us that day, right? And I said to William, how did you do that? Like, how did you come in? You're so terrified of the church. He said, I saw all of you go in and I didn't want to let you down. I wanted to be there with you. And he stopped drinking after that for a number of weeks. And that is quite miraculous when you know what he went through in a day. And I realized, like he said, all of the therapy in the world never helped me. But doing that one thing, going in there together, I lost my fear of those priests, because some of the priests actually turned and ran out the back door when they saw us coming, right? So, I mean, if you want to call recovery, I don't like the word healing, but recovery and transforming it into something bigger than who we are, it happens together. You find that energy and power together, and by action, not by talking, but by doing something. And then the power of the enemy really seems to fade, because most of their power is illusory. It's the fear we have of them, not what they have in real life. And they're just people like us, and you can appeal to those hearts and minds. So anyway, I mentioned that because it shows you what we're talking about, the power. We create our own energy to counter theirs, but we don't do it just by ourselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said there about, you know, it's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz, where they pull back the curtain, it's just this little old man. You know, it's a little bit like that. They don't have any genuine power, do they? It's just the illusion of power, which keeps us feeling small and subordinate. I think that's the key, isn't it?
And it was funny when we all came out of the church. One of these fat Vancouver cops showed up, you know, kind of lumbered up, and he said, "You can't go in there." And I said, "Well, we already did." And he was standing there, and the native people were actually laughing at this cop. And he turned around all haughty, and he said, "Don't you know who I am?" And one of the native elders just said to him very calmly, "You're just a guy in a blue suit. You should take this suit off." And you could see his whole power just go, because he was thinking, yeah, I guess I am just a guy in a blue suit.
That's a little bit of white magic, actually, what they've done there, because, you know, they become the suits, they become the blue suit, right? And then if you can kind of remind them that they are the person in the suit and they're not the suit, then it's almost like you snap them out the trance a little bit, I think, you know? Well,
it was interesting when, quote, the Pope, who always is in a white robe, and I said, you always have to suspect somebody who wears a robe and looks saintly all the time. What are they hiding, right? But some of the Mohawk elders were trying to get up to the ceremony he held, and they brought in all their puppet native chiefs to kind of fawn all over the guy when he was there and accept the apology and all that. But some of the Mohawk clan mothers were going to go up. They had a plan, but then they were literally arrested and stopped from doing it. They were going to go up and tear the robe off him and spank him publicly.
Oh, wow.
Because that way, that's what they do in their culture. They've done it with their own chiefs. The clan mothers hold the moral authority, and they can depose anyone, and they were going to do that. Can you imagine the impact of seeing the Pope have his robe removed and then spanked and evicted from the territory? I mean, that's exactly what we're going to do, that kind of theater, because it counts coup. You ride up to your enemy unarmed with a coup stick, and you hit him. And then you're saying, look, I'm more brave than you are. I'm unarmed. And that's what we do all the time. We're not armed in your sense, but we're more powerful than you. And every time we do that, their power diminishes a bit, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's probably going to happen here with a lot of the people that were enforcing the convid stuff, the clown vid stuff. I have to be careful what I say here, but a lot of those people, I wouldn't be surprised if they get, lynched at some point because their time's coming. Put it that way, and they can't run forever. Can I ask about that? So, what was the result of that? You going into that church then? Was there actually a ceremony for the children in the end? Like, what happened after that?
It was March 2008. Within a week, a member of parliament got up and said, we need an investigation into these missing children. Now, the man who did that, Gary Morasti, who was a Cree member of parliament, he had just watched my documentary film Unrepentant, which had come out the year before, which documented all these things. And he said, we need an investigation into these missing children. Then they announced their so-called Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but it was all in the wake of that church occupation. And the native elders had been holding ceremonies banishing these churches from their land, like energetically, just you leave now. And in the years following, something like 36 churches have been burned to the ground in Canada. All over the world now, this is happening more. Just your time is over. You're collapsing literally, right? So, I mean, it created that ripple effect. And the next year I went to Rome and I did the same thing outside the Vatican. It was interesting because when you go to the Vatican, St. Peter's Square, it's, quote, their territory, 108 acres. And you're not allowed to go on and hold any kind of ceremony, right? Or you get arrested by the Vatican police. That just happened to some native elders the week before I got there. I'm standing there and I do a ceremony for the missing children. I had some soil from these Catholic graves at these Catholic schools. And I'm standing there in my regalia with two other people. And these Vatican police and cops are walking by and they don't even stop me. They don't even look at me. And I'm thinking, I guess I'm invisible or something. But I called out the spirit of Rome. It was like the first stage of an exorcism where you call out the entity to name itself and to depart, right? So I do the ceremony. The next morning, a tornado hits Rome. You can look this up. It was October 11th, 2009. And the 12th was the next day. A tornado hits the center of Rome, and that week, the European media started reporting Ratzinger's role in covering up rape of children and murder of children. It's covered. It all comes out that week, and I knew there was this kind of boom. I was at the eye of some kind of storm, and that's what I mean when we're the channels of that. It's not us doing it. It's this power of truth working through us, right? And all those dead children and everything, and it led to the toppling of Ratzinger and more. I mean, this will only continue, all of this stuff, right?
Yeah. You're a powerful conduit for a lot of ancestral kind of power, aren't you? And you're kind of a vessel for that. It's incredible. Yeah. Can I ask then, because I'm trying to connect the dots a little bit here. How do we describe and summarize what is actually happening? Would you say that you've got the Vatican, you've got the Crown, and then you've got the kind of corporations? Let's just say that is like there may be more to it, but let's just take those three. Would you say that we're not saying Christianity's ostensibly bad. We're saying that as an institution, it's been hijacked and inverted, and it's now, what would you say, pushing, it's now using it as a platform for global child trafficking. Would that be a right kind of way of describing it? How would you describe the network?
Well, I think when you look at the history, Rome was the first corporation in history, in history. In 317, it was made a legal corporation by Constantine, the emperor. But when you look at the title of the Pope, the structure of the Vatican, its whole ideology, it's the Roman Empire. It's even the term, what's the term in Latin? It escapes me for a minute.
For what?
For the Great Bridge between heaven and earth. It was the title of the Roman Emperor, Maximus.
Okay. Yeah.
It'll come back. Anyway, Vicari Christi, it's another one of his titles. It means, Vicari Christi in Latin means the one who replaces Christ.
Right.
And when you look at the popes are all saying, I'm Christ on earth. You don't need Christ, come to me. That's why my Protestant ancestors went ballistic. And all the churches, including the Church of England, at one point believed, yes, Rome, not the Pope, but Rome is antichrist, as described in the book of Revelation. The seven hills, the beast with the seven hills. so it's this worldly substitute. And the father of lies, as Jesus describes Satan, right? Works through lies. It was the template for all the governments of Europe, which then became the world. The whole corporate system was modeled by Rome. Now, in a corporation, you remove all legal and moral liability of the officers. So you can kill and hide behind the corporate shell and get away with it. That's the purpose of a corporation, to do crime, to allow you to do crime and take over the whole world. But it doesn't remove your liability as a human being. And that's how we tried these people. Elizabeth Windsor, Joseph Ratzinger, we called them in as individuals, right? And that's where they have no protection, right? They're all liable. We're all liable for our actions as people. So I would say Rome was the model for everything. And, it's things grew out of that original deadly root. And so what you call Christianity, a lot of it isn't even in the Bible. Like I say to people when I was giving sermons, I would say, show me in the Bible where it mentions the Trinity or the word the fall. It doesn't. These are church creations, right? And people, on the one hand, like it's like in the native world, you have the traditions, but then you have the way it's publicly presented. And so public Christianity has all the dogma, but the point is the churches are all tied into the state. They're an arm of the state. And that was the model set up by Rome. Church and state are one. Boom, you got one authority. And that's why they did the death camps in Canada, a church and state authority working together. It's really the same beast. And if you take support from the state, if you're tax exempt status or licensing of any kind, you're in bed with it. And so that's why we say to people, just break away, do your own thing. You don't need a church body to practice your faith, right?
Yeah. And then is there a connection then with the trafficking? Like it's an important part of that network, right?
It is. It always has been. That we found in the research into the Ninth Circle that the sacrificial rituals, it was set up by the Jesuits as a way to control popes. Every pope, every cardinal has to be part of this cult or they're killed, like John Paul I was in 1978. But it predates the Jesuits. It goes back to ancient Roman times. You see, the Romans would do child sacrifices all the time for the crops. The 22nd and 24th of every month, especially February 22nd and 24th, they were called the Feasts of Terminalia, when they would sacrifice children. These are old traditions going back thousands of years that still operate. And so when you think of it as rulers, how do you best control the people? How do the few control the many? By traumatizing them at a young age, so they're not even capable of thinking against authority, let alone acting against it. And also, they know your children could be taken at any moment, if you get out of line. And that happens in the Indian world all the time, the native world. If you come out in the people who start protesting, boom, their children are grabbed by the government, trafficked, disappear, never see them again. That happens all the time. So it's a great way to control people and traumatize us. So we're walking slaves. I mean, it's an old system. Every ruler relies on it. So, you can see how it all kind of helps.
It's all connected. Would you say that the kids are actually trafficked from, because I spoke to Karine Hutzabart, she's a FBI criminal profiler, and she says the Vatican provide the children for the crown, for the royals and stuff like that. And then they're pimped out to England.
Well, it isn't just the Vatican. As a matter of fact, I mentioned Toos Nieuwenhuis in Holland, who survived the Ninth Circle. She was part of the cult. She said, and another woman, Anne-Marie van Blienberg, who was a lawyer who got trapped in the cult. She said, Drangheta, which is the kind of the European term for the mafia in Europe, they provide a lot of the children, and they have human hunting parties where they take adolescents and teenagers, strip them naked, make them run through the woods. Right outside Brussels, they do this.
I've spoken to Darren Webster. I spoke to. He was one of the kids that was stripped naked and ran through Rainbow Woods in Bath. And Lord Mountbatten was one of the people, and a certain other high-profile figure in our country at the moment was also there. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, the mafia, organized crime provides it. The government. So it's multiple sources. It isn't just one, but it's again the same beast, right?
Yeah, it's like different strands of the same beast. Yeah. Can I ask you just a little bit about Anne-Marie? She was an eyewitness to rituals, right? And she said that there was Dutch royalty there, George
Yep.
Soros.
Yep.
Anyone else like key figures there?
Well, Mark Rutte, who was a Dutch either president or prime minister for a
Right.
long time, maybe he still is, I don't know. She mentioned a whole number of people. I think it's in one of the things I posted, the names. But the thing is, she said it was so widespread and that it's pointless to talk about individuals. Everybody is implicated. I mean, you either know about it or you're protecting it. I mean, or you kind of sense it, but you know not to go there if you're in the police or the military. Do you remember the Marc Dutroux case? He was a serial killer.
Belgium, yeah.
I met with a guy, Laurent Louis. He was a member of the Belgian parliament, and he tried to get the Dutroux case reopened because in his original statement, Dutroux mentioned members of the Dutch royal family. That got all edited out in the court case. Laurent Louis, who tried to bring it up, got thrown out of the Belgian parliament. His immunity suddenly vanished. He's thrown in prison for 6 months and fined. He disappeared after that. I don't know what happened to him, but you come down, it's like you pose any kind of serious threat to this stuff and you're targeted, and that's why you got to get the information out immediately to everybody.
Yeah, of course, and get it backed up with lots of other people, like a kill switch, so that if anything did happen to you, it would exponentially come out. That's what I would do anyway, you know, like to
you're right.
myself. People are silly, like they sit on things and then they you never hear from them again and their work dies with them. I just think you got to be more streetwise with this stuff, I think. So Anne-Marie, something I was going to talk about. Sorry, can I just go into my notes? I've wrote so many things down here.
Oh, sure.
So Pope Francis.
Well, Jorge Bergoglio was, if you look into his history, there's this infamous picture of him with the Argentine military junta General Videla. In the 70s and 80s, there was it was called the Dirty Wars. The generals took over in Argentina. They killed about 30,000 people. This is when the Falklands War happened in 82, but the military in power. Anyway, Bergoglio went from being a lowly priest to head of all the Jesuits in 14 years because he was the frontman for the military junta. And he would go around the world like he does now, smiley face, you know, putting a nice mask on the whole murder. His own priests were being thrown out of helicopters into the ocean, and he turned a blind eye. He wouldn't talk about it. But he also managed the child trafficking through the Cathedral Plaza del Mayo in Buenos Aires. Big child trafficking. We've talked to nuns who knew about it, who saw Bergoglio involved in these rituals. And what's interesting, there was a Dutch journalist, Alice Stur, who documented the money exchanging between the present Queen of the Netherlands and Bergoglio, because she's in Argentine like he is. And they've been paying each other off up to 14,000 euros a month for the last dozen years. And they're involved in, well, we know her father definitely was. He was in the cabinet of the military junta, but they're involved in the Ninth Circle. And again, the Dutch royals using their facilities to provide children and the whole bit. So there's that direct link. And, so no wonder he's going around trying to make himself look all liberal and progressive because he's got this horrible past himself. He goes to Ninth Circle rituals. That's one of the reasons he was in Canada, because Canada is the worst place to be if you're native or you're poor or vulnerable, because there's no any kind of safeguards against the power of the Mounties and the churches, and they can do whatever they want at any time, right?
Because I thought with Justin Trudeau, he's very woke, and I thought he's sort of always supporting like the people of color, and you'd have thought he supports the natives, right? But isn't there like
he does verbally? No, I mean it's all trendy now. It's the trendy thing to do to talk about genocide. He admitted to genocide. So did Bergoglio. Well, under the UN Convention on Genocide, he should have then immediately been arrested and faced a war crimes trial. But they're in charge, so they,
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. What's your opinion on Trudeau, by the way? Is he Fidel Castro's son?
Well, actually, I grew up in Vancouver, where his mother, Margaret Sinclair, who was very true. When his dad, Pierre, I always had this groovy image, right? This kind of hippie prime minister. But Margaret Trudeau Sinclair, when she was a child, went into a thing called the Hollywood Hospital, which was a CIA funded shelter hospital in New Westminster, which is a suburb of Vancouver. all three Trudeau children were there too. I mean, this is a direct case of Manchurian candidate. One of the sons sacrificed. Sasha died in a, quote, skiing accident, which is kind of, the code word for when you're in these cults, you sacrifice one of your children. He has all the indications of a Manchurian candidate, the look on his face that we've talked to the nurse who saw the Trudeau children being brought into this place in the early 1970s, right? And so, I mean, I think he's definitely under control. But I mean, like an anecdote, my uncle, George McCourt, he was a bagman for the Liberal Party in the 70s. And he used to tell this story about he and his wife were sitting with Pierre and Margaret Trudeau in the Chateau Laurier restaurant in Ottawa. And the Mountie goons are kind of surrounding the prime minister in that. Margaret Trudeau, his wife, says something Pierre doesn't like. He reaches back and plows her one right in the face, knocks her cold, and then carries on with his dinner. And my Uncle George and Aunt Claudette, being Canadians, just sat there and smiled and didn't do anything. But the point is, that's the atmosphere in which these kids are raised, this violent, child-raping prime minister. And there was you look up the name John Seeley, Seeley. He was a CIA consultant, sociologist, he was the handler of all three Trudeau children. And he lived in the Trudeau house. He was their MK Ultra handler. So, I mean, the evidence is there. It's just a question of, well, people ask, what do you do with it? Where do you take the evidence? And that's why we go on about these common law courts and the power of public exposure, right? And acting on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And how are you getting on with that? Because your Republic Kanata, have I said that right?
Yeah.
Do you want to give that
up and down?
I mention, yeah. Do you want to sort of talk and also kind of,
yeah,
I guess remind us all that we do have the power in a way, if you can, as you're saying this. Yeah.
Well, it starts in here, right? And then finding others who are there. And one of the problems I think people make when they do this work is they're trying to reach everybody. And the reality is 80 to 90% of people cannot be reached. You expend yourself bashing against that wall, trying to move people who are still completely chained into the system. You reach the remnant, you reach the 10 or less percent who are able to act. Again, in The Art of War, he talks about that. He's in Sun Tzu, he says, battles are never won by masses. They're won by seasoned veterans leading the rest. And so our whole strategy has always been to reach those people like you and kind of organize them, because realistically, we're kind of the vanguard that breaks through, and then it becomes easier for the people to follow. So I always had a problem with that, because I'm against, by nature, any elitist notions. But the reality is there's always a few who are more determined, braver, more determined not to give up. And those are the ones you got to reach. So that's been our strategy when we formed the Republic. We said, look, this isn't for everybody. These are for people who cannot and will not live under the present regime anymore. We get people to sign a charter, 12 or more people to form a local assembly that can pass laws, disaffiliate from the crown. It's all up online, republicofcanada.org, how to do it. Now, it's gone up and down a lot because Canadians are kind of tepid by nature, and at least English Canadians, different in Quebec, but we're in the native world. But when COVID hit, our membership increased by more than tenfold because everybody wanted to see an alternative. But when we found, and I was involved in making, helping form a lot of these assemblies, people get to the point, okay, let's pass a law saying COVID measures are banned in our community. Well, now you have to enforce it. You got to go to the police, you got to deputize them, you got to create your own sheriffs. And in other words, it's the long-term commitment. You got to be committed to building a new world. And look, most people, even the awake ones, they don't want to do that. People are, I call them the babblers and the dabblers. They like to talk and they like to dabble in issues, kind of move around and dabble in different issues. But to reorient your life to saying, I'm committed to this now to the death. We need to create a new system. It's the most important thing in my life. And because it's going to affect our offspring, generations down the line. What we do now or don't do will determine their life, and, so anyway, that's kind of generally.
Is that something that, so here in England, I could start my own republic. Is that right?
Well, people have already
Mm,
done it, and people have talked about. You see, anywhere in the Commonwealth, this works.
right.
You say, look, for 3 or 4 reasons that we've talked about, the 1649 that did away with the monarchy, the convicted status of the British monarchy because of our common law court trials, or just the right of you to pull out. You
Mm,
know, the book everyone needs to read in the English world is The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was kind of like the philosopher of the French and the American Revolution.
mm,
And the British world has kind of a Hobbesian notion. Thomas Hobbes said in the time of the Puritans, he said, well, the monarch has absolute authority, and
mm,
they protect you, and in return you give them all your sovereignty and authority into one person. Rousseau said you never surrender sovereignty. Anyone you elect has no authority over you. You can withdraw at any point, right? And that Rousseauian notion people have to recover, because you have the inherent right to pull out of the system whenever you want
mm,
and establish something different. Not now, unless you establish a new jurisdiction, you're de facto in the crown jurisdiction,
mm.
and that's why you need to. Well, if you read the site, you'll see it's a Declaration of Independence, and we've got people, individuals all over the world doing this stuff. We do calls. We call it the Republic Alliance. We have people in 13 countries who are trying to find ways of doing that in their own country. What we started in Canada.
I would like to start. I would like to continue that movement somehow and create something here. So
We'll talk about it offline,
I
John.
would like to. I'd really like to do that. Yeah.
Okay,
And
there's people I can put you in touch with. Yep.
yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of people that I'm connecting with now, even farmers, like the Farmers Alliance, and they're kind of creating their own network with a delivery service, so we can completely bypass the
Good.
supermarkets. That's one thing I'm doing. Another guy I'm
Good.
working with, he's created a homeschooling thing where they're taking the kids out of the schools and they're trying to teach the kids themselves. Because again, another part of it is, so I'm trying to be part of that spider's web, the new spider's web of
Yep.
connecting everything together. So I want to be part of this new paradigm. By the way, Ken,
That's also
yeah, go on.
yeah. Well, it's really powerful. What you're doing there is what needs to happen on the ground. It's the solid work of creating an
Mm,
alternative for people,
yeah.
because most people don't support the system, but they're not going to change until they see an alternative that works.
Mm,
And that alternative you got to show in your community by all of this work. But the added part is, if you don't have an alternative political and legal jurisdiction to belong to, you're in their bailiwick, whether you like it or not. So you got to declare that independence, build up your own. And what I say to cops, I show them my Republic of Canada citizenship card. When
mm.
the cops stop me, and I say, I'm not in your jurisdiction. You should join our jurisdiction. Read this. Disavow your oath of allegiance to Charlie Boy and come over
Yeah,
to the people.
absolutely. Yeah, that's powerful. I think that's maybe why people used to have their own flags back in the day, because it was representing your own republics. I don't know, but
Right.
I need to
Right.
get a bit more clued up on that. By the way, just before we go, I want to say, Kevin, thank you so much. You're a real warrior, and you're actually a really top dude as well to talk to. And you're very open and humble and unassuming, and you've gone through a lot. You've gone through health issues, attacks, seen a lot of your friends die, but you're still fighting. You're still pushing. You're still trying to do the best. Come from the heart. That wound that you got, probably, like you said, it's had a double sworded effect of actually giving you some kind of discernment and spiritual discernment as well. And that's why you're leading, you're being alpha. Yeah, so I want to say thank you so much, mate. And I'd love to, talk to you off air and also have you back on again. Before I go, I'm just going to ask one last thing. Have you noticed all the funny stuff that's going on with Charlie and Kate Middleton? She went missing, and the Queen died, I think, slightly suspiciously. Do you think they're running scared a little bit, because you all this talk about cancer, and I think it's a smokescreen for something a lot deeper, like they're on the run a little bit.
I think people in that position are never scared because they're so
Yeah.
dissociated that they don't know what's going on. You see, that's the thing. The higher up you go in a psychotic system, the more crazy you are. So
Mm,
that's why I say to people, don't watch the hand puppet show, like between Biden and Trump and all the latest
mm,
corporate hand puppets. That's not where the power lies. The power is right here, and we gain that power since we turn away from this stage show, right? And so I think generally that's what we follow. That's the big part: get people to detach their minds from what's around them all the time, right?
mm. Yeah, that's ultimately the power. within. I was just interested to know what you thought about the Kate Middleton, her going missing and coming back. And I don't know if you saw that.
Who knows if it's true? I mean,
Oh,
like, I don't,
yeah.
I don't really care.
No, I know.
But
I guess not. No, I guess not. But there's something
it's
I
kind of
think. I
fun.
think they're panicking a little bit. But like you said, it's not. It's probably more important to focus on ourselves at this point, and find the sovereignty back, within ourselves, because we kind of lost that a
Right.
little bit. Kevin, tell the audience about your books, because we'll give that a plug, and
Yeah.
I'll encourage people to buy the books.
Well, if you go to murderbydecree.com, you scroll down a bit, there's a link to all of my books. There's 24 of them now.
Mm.
And including like manuals. I've done a whistleblower manual, a common law training manual, all the work we've been doing and everything. Also some biographical works about, how I got here, my story, because that's what people gets them interested when you tell a story, what you've been through, right? So that's all online, murderbydecree.com. They're also at Amazon, all my books. And people should know, not only murderbydecree.com, Republic of Kanata, Kanata, republicofkanata.org. I do a blog show on Sundays. It's 6 p.m. Eastern time. I think you've got all the links, so you can post all
I'll
those.
put them all in. Yeah, definitely.
But you should also know that I've been invited, interestingly, to come to Italy and France in the fall. And so I'll be in Europe late September into October, kind of reviving some of this work and seeing friends and that. So definitely we should get together. And
no, I'd like that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we got to get the power back a little bit, and if we
Yeah.
could connect some alphas, and I think we can make a difference here. I really do.